Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to fundamentally dismantle exactly how you view business growth. If you're here, you already know scaling a company is incredibly difficult, but we're going to completely shift your mental model away from that traditional knee-jerk reflex of just adding headcount and move it toward the rigorous discipline of structural system design. We're going to look at exactly why operations literally break down under pressure and precisely how to rebuild them. Okay, let's quickly glance at our agenda for today. We'll start with the headcount scaling fallacy, map out failure modes like coordination collapse and decision latency, draw some crucial distinctions in process improvement, outline concrete conditional operational decision rules, and finish up with the structural growth blueprint. Let's get right into it. Section 1, the headcount scaling fallacy. We absolutely have to begin by destroying a foundational myth about business growth. So, conventional advice usually dictates that when your organizational output plateaus, you should immediately just scale up your headcount. I mean, it sounds logical, right? More hands equals more work. But structurally, this is completely backward. Scaling headcount without first scaling your process infrastructure actually amplifies your coordination load way faster than it increases your productive capacity. You've probably felt this in your own teams. It happens because every new person you drop into an undefined system geometrically increases the number of required communication paths. It just creates massive structural friction. And here is where we draw a very clear distinction. Headcount scaling merely shoves more people into a totally dysfunctional environment. You're basically paying for expensive talent just to sit in a broken workflow and manage friction. Operational scaling, on the other hand, changes the underlying system itself. It eliminates that friction so your existing team can produce disproportionate output. It's the architectural upgrade that absolutely must precede any hiring phase. Section 2, failure mode, coordination collapse. We really need to explicitly name these specific breakdowns so we know exactly what we're diagnosing. We call this first failure mode proximity coordination collapse. This systemic breakdown happens when an organization's complexity suddenly outpaces leadership's ability to maintain shared context through informal proximity. You know how in the early stages everyone knows everything because information just naturally flows through casual conversations? Well, eventually that proximity shatters. Think about your own team for a second, and let's trace the causal mechanism here. The failure doesn't happen because your team suddenly stopped working hard. It happens because operations that rely on informal proximity inevitably hit a complexity threshold. Suddenly, information asymmetries emerge. One team has context that another team totally lacks. This fractures your shared context, which means practically every single project requires endless, exhausting negotiations over ownership and priority before execution can even start. Throughput stalls entirely because the underlying communication architecture just collapsed. Section 3, failure mode, decision latency. This brings us to our next major operational breakdown, which acts as a silent killer of agility. Let's explicitly name this one the decision latency cascade. It's this deadly friction point where an organization lacks clearly defined decision rights. What happens is a single unmade decision ends up blocking a massive chain of subsequent actions. And here's the thing, that latency isn't a symptom of laziness, not at all. It's a symptom of a missing operational structure. The causal mechanism here is vital to grasp. The failure occurs because information and authority do not flow transparently. When decision authority remains ambiguous, leaders and teams are forced to guess at their boundaries instead of actually knowing them. And because nobody wants to overstep, routine decisions inappropriately escalate right to the top. Without an explicitly documented operating rhythm to force these choices, a bottlenecked authority figure gets totally overwhelmed. One stalled decision blocks all downstream execution, causing deep frustration to build up, while the organization's agility essentially dies. Section 4, distinctions in process improvement. To cure these specific failure modes, we've got to draw some non-obvious distinctions about how we fix them. Because honestly, a misapplied fix can be way worse than the original problem. The most crucial point here is avoiding the premature automation trap. This is such a widespread error. If you jump straight to software solutions without rigorously mapping and rationalizing your pain points first, you guarantee that you automate your waste right alongside your actual work. You're just encoding inefficiency into silicon, which makes it infinitely harder to root out later. We also have to draw a hard boundary between workflows and processes. They are not synonyms. Workflows are the granular, task-level execution sequences. Processes, however, are the overarching strategic structures that house those workflows. Misalignment here is fatal. If your strategic process demands one outcome, but the daily workflow is sequenced for something else entirely, you generate immediate operational drag, endless rework, and frequent errors. Furthermore, we must distinguish our tools, because methodologies are absolutely not interchangeable. Lean is deployed strictly to eliminate non-value-adding steps from a value stream. It removes the unnecessary. Six Sigma, conversely, is utilized exclusively to control and reduce variation in processes that must remain highly consistent. Using Six Sigma on a process full of structural waste just ensures you produce waste with perfect consistency. You have to diagnose the illness before prescribing the cure. Section 5. Conditional operational decision rules. Let's see how this all builds into concrete decision logic for your operations. We need strict rules of engagement here. You can't just guess, you need to observe the condition and apply the specific rule. First, if you observe that operational drag is caused by non-value-adding steps and bloated approvals, deploy lean logic to strip out that waste. Second, if the drag is caused by erratic, unpredictable variation in how a necessary task is performed, deploy Six Sigma logic to standardize the output. And third, if the environment is highly uncertain and the correct solution demands discovery through actual user feedback, rely on agile iteration. Match the methodologies strictly to the observable condition. To apply true force multipliers effectively, we use another set of conditional rules. If your processes require heavy manual repetition of data, implement automation tools. If your highly skilled staff are repeatedly relearning complex tasks because they lack documentation, enforce strict process standardization. If tasks are generating friction but fall entirely outside your organization's core competencies, leverage strategic outsourcing. And crucially, if single-role dependencies are creating bottlenecks and blocking throughput, immediately deploy cross-training to distribute that capability. Section 6. The Structural Growth Blueprint. Finally, let's assemble this entire diagnostic framework into a proactive operating system you can actually deploy. This is the exact unyielding sequence required to successfully scale your operations. First, you audit to map reality and uncover those hidden drag forces. Second, you define strict improvement goals. Third, you redesign the process structurally to eliminate the waste you just found. Fourth, and literally only fourth, do you layer automation onto the newly cleaned process. Finally, you install the monitoring mechanisms to enforce standard work so the system doesn't regress back to its old ways. Skipping even one step here basically guarantees failure. The underlying principle of everything we've explored today is anticipation. You absolutely must build your operational architecture before structural growth makes it an urgent crisis. Waiting until your informal proximity collapses or your decision latency cascades means you will be forced into the total chaos of reactive crisis scaling. Build the infrastructure while things are relatively calm so the system is ready to absorb the complexity when it inevitably arrives. I want to leave you with this final thought to challenge your current trajectory. Look really closely at your organization right now. Are you actually scaling your operational infrastructure, or are you just funding the acceleration of your own structural friction? Evaluate whether your next move is blindly adding capacity to a fundamentally broken system, or if you have the discipline to fix the underlying system first, thereby releasing the massive capacity you already have locked away in friction. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer.